Hi everyone, it's Kendall here, and what I have for you today is week number 6 of our Grandma's Kitchen Sew-Along, which is hosted by Pat Sloan at her website, ilovetomakequilts.com. If you haven't done so already, jump over to Pat's website, download this week's free pattern, come back here, and I'll show you how I do it. On the cutting mat in front of me, I have pieces that look very different to the original cutting instructions because for that block, it is made up of half square triangles and squares, all of the same size, and is a very simple construction method with lots of seams and intersections. So I thought, what if we don't want to cut up our beautiful fabric, and can we make it with larger half square triangles and quarter square triangles? And the answer is yes. So in the description box below is a separate cutting sheet for the way I am doing it throughout this tutorial. You are free to make this block in whichever method you are most comfortable with, but come with me and I'll show you how simple this is. So on the cutting mat, my A and D squares are both 5.5 inches. My B strips are exactly the same as the pattern, being 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. My C fabric, I'm choosing to use background fabric for the center of the block, and that is a 2.5 inch square. And my E square there, I have two 5-inch squares, and they will make the half square triangles, and you'll see how this all goes together. We are going to start with our A and D fabrics, and as I said, that is just one each of a 5.5 inch square, and we need to cut these twice on the diagonal. With those squares now cut twice on the diagonal, we just need to sew these in pairs, making sure that we can match it back to the pattern. So if you place your fabric E over on the right hand side and the fabric A on the left there, making sure that we are connecting the correct edges together. So place them exactly as you see me doing here on the screen. I wasn't sure what it was. And then after we've sewn these together, we'll press all of these seams open. We're now going to take our fabric E squares, and these get cut just once on the diagonal to create the other side of what will be our pieced half square triangle. We're now going to take the half square triangles that we just made from our E fabric and place them together with our pieced half square triangle that was made up of the two quarter square triangles. Am I confusing you yet? Am I giving you horrid flashbacks to your geometry days back at school? Just to make sure that we get this nice and even, we'll take our larger half square triangle and fold it in the center, and we'll match that up with the seam line from our quarter square triangle units. We'll then take these to the machine and stitch our 1/4 inch seam. Getting this perfect isn't really all that necessary as we will be trimming them down, but let's just try and get it as close as we can first of all, so that we can actually trim these down. And with that seam now sewn, we'll just press all of these towards that half square triangle unit. Trimming these down is a little bit different to if we were just trimming a half square triangle, but it is also kind of the same. confused yet? Stick with me. We're going to take our ruler and we're going to make sure that it does have that 45-degree line, or a diagonal if it is a square ruler. We need the final trim down measurement for these to be 4.5 inches. So let's take note of where our 2.25 inch mark dissects, as that is half of your 4.5 inches. We're going to make sure that that 2.25 intersection hits the center of the block while maintaining our 45-degree or diagonal line along the seam line, with our half square triangle pointing down and to the right. You can also just check in that upper left-hand corner that the 4.5 inch mark is dissecting that seam from the quarter square triangles. Then we'll just trim away those first two sides. Rotate the block around and we can now just place our 4.5 inches on those freshly cut sides, and you will notice that so long as you have your diagonal along your seam line, that 2.25 inch mark will hit the center of the block. Once again, on that lower right hand corner, you can double check that the 4.5 inch mark is dissecting that seam. Once you're satisfied that everything is as it should be, trim the final two sides and we have a perfect block. Trim all four down in exactly the same way. We now just need to add a strip B to each of these, and we're going to attach it to the left hand side, making sure that the background fabric from our quarter square triangle is pointing up and that we're attaching it to the actual print fabric, as you can see here. With that done, we just press out towards that solid piece of fabric, or background fabric, or strip B, whatever you want to refer to it as, just press towards it. We're now ready to lay this block out, and as you may have guessed from the original image, this goes together and it will use a partial seam. Now, partial seams aren't scary, they're not the end of the world, and once you get the hang of it, you'll say to yourself, why was I ever bothered with partial seams? Because they're your friend. How you begin with a partial seam is you pick one of your pieces up and attach it to that center square, but we are only going to sew halfway along these two pieces. When we get to that mark, which I am marking now with the pin, we'll just do a couple of back stitches, and that will prevent the fabric from pulling apart. So find out where the center of your 2.5 inch square is, take it to the machine and just stitch down halfway on that block and do a little bit of a back stitch. We'll then press in towards that center square, and what this does is creates a piece that is long enough for us to do an entire seam along for the next three pieces that we're going to add. The whole way along we will press in towards the middle. Once we have all four attached, we finalize that partial seam, but I'll talk to you more when we get to that point. Okay, so I actually pressed up towards the piece that we were adding on, or the piece section away from the center of the block, and I think I do that for once we get all the way around, it makes it easier to finish the partial seam. So we'll just continue adding these pieces and pressing out, and then as I said, I'll meet you back when we're ready to finish that partial seam off. We're now ready to finish off this partial seam, and as you can see, the block just simply comes together. So we'll just fold this part over and we'll sew down to where we previously stopped, and once again do a couple of back stitches just to make sure that the center of that is secure. Now you may or may not have noticed during that fast forwarding footage that I clipped into the seam allowances in some instances, and that was just to control the bulk of the block. You're free to press these in whichever way makes sense to your brain, and sometimes I do things without even thinking about it, so there's no point trying to describe that to you. I think what was happening was where the bulky of the seams from the quarter square, half square triangles comes in, just so that I could fold the fabric in the way I wanted, I've just clipped either side of that bulky part there. That goes in the direction that it wants to because of the bulk of the fabric, and everything else presses out and away from the center. Simple as that, and it just helps produce a nice flat block. Give everything one final press, and keep in mind that this week's block is actually only 10.5 inches. So refer to the layout diagrams for the framing and sashing that will go around this in the asymmetrical format, also for the symmetrical format. Finish out this week's video, just 2 images of what this block looks like on repeat, either with or without sashing. So I hope everyone was okay with that little change that I made to the pattern. To me, reducing the number of seam lines is just something that makes sense to my brain, but I really do understand why they create blocks with squares and half square triangles. They are the foundation of everything that we do in quilting and do have their place. I just like to think, do I really want to see a seam line in that print fabric? And by having the larger half square triangle units made up, it gives you an opportunity to include more of your print fabric if it has large prints. Just makes sense to me. If you haven't done so already, I'd love for you to like the video, share it with a friend you think may be interested, click that subscribe button if you haven't done so, and I don't know why not. It's free and one of the best ways to support the channel. Once you have clicked that little subscribe button, make sure you do tickle the little bell icon, he gets lonely, and then you'll be notified of all my future releases. I'll see you all again real soon. Bye for now.